Video game controllers come in all different shapes and configurations, although in the past few years the popular console controllers have gone with a somewhat standardised scheme. 2 analog sticks, 4 shoulder buttons, 4 face buttons, and a 4-directional pad. They also include 2 extra buttons, plus and minus, menu and view, options and share. These 2 buttons find their vestigial origins as start and select, which have been a feature of almost every video game controller going back to the Nintendo Entertainment System. The start button has served nearly the same function for over 35 years. It pauses the action, letting players suspend a game as long as the console remains on. In later games, pressing start may also bring up a menu that lets players sort their inventory, check a map, and even adjust their game settings. Things that would be difficult to do during active gameplay. But what of the select button? Sometimes it does something you'd expect the start button to do, like bring up a map or character's inventory. Or it may be something unique, like changing a weapon, throwing a grenade, or bringing up a radio. Sometimes it does absolutely nothing. You may wonder then, with it placed so closely to the start button and its purpose so ill-defined, why even have it at all? Well, the select button is a vestigial element from a time before the Nintendo Entertainment System. In fact, it finds its roots in arcade games, both in their original form and their home conversions. The select button does just that. Players choose what mode of game they want to play, and press start to initiate it. For example, in Pong they select whether they want to play with a human or computer opponent. The Nintendo Entertainment System's early success relied on its near-perfect recreation of Nintendo's arcade experiences, such as the popular Donkey Kong. Although a joystick needed to be adapted to a 4-way directional pad, start and select could be carried over with no issues. This is also the reason why the select button appears on the Game Boy, to ensure that a home console-like experience of the time could be replicated on a portable machine. The NES era saw an end to arcade adaptations as home consoles finally found their footing with more sophisticated games. However, Nintendo's next console, the Super NES, kept the select button. Why was that? Especially when the SNES's main competitor, the Sega Mega Drive, had done away with it. Well, originally the SNES was planned to be completely backwards compatible with the NES. It's why the two share variants of the same CPU, for example. However, it was decided that later in the console's design, the audio and video chips would lose their NES compatibility. Despite this, the controllers still retain the select button, as if parity was still necessary. This is the same reason why the select button continued to appear on the Game Boy Advance, the Nintendo DS, and Nintendo 3DS, as each of these consoles was backwards compatible with its immediate predecessor. For their first polygonal-focused console, Nintendo would ditch the select button. The N64 controller, in many ways, was a bold declaration of focusing on the future. This meant no backwards compatibility, and no unnecessary select button. However, its main competitor, the Sony PlayStation, retained that select button. Why was that? Well, that is another vestigial element of unresolved gaming history. The PlayStation started as a project between Nintendo and Sony which sought to add CD compatibility to the SNES, meaning that the controller needed to have parity with SNES games that already used that vestigial select button. When this deal fell through and the PlayStation became a standalone console, the controller retained much of the appearance of the original SNES pad, including that select button. The enormous success of the PlayStation was due in part to its control scheme, which, rather than bend around new 3D gameplay, instead sought to standardise 3D to a scheme people had grown accustomed to. When it came to their next console, Sony decided not to fix something that didn't need it, instead repackaging their now popular DualShock controller for the PS2. The enormous success of that console cemented that the design of the DualShock, with its 4 shoulder buttons, 2 analog sticks, 4 face buttons, and 4-way directional pad, would be here to stay, as would the start and select buttons. In the years since, console manufacturers have iterated in unique ways on that iconic design. The Xbox controller moved the position of sticks to asymmetric heights, and turned its back shoulder buttons into triggers. The Nintendo Wii removed almost all buttons of a standard controller, but kept start and select analogs so that it could be compatible with Virtual Console NES games. Eventually, Sony would introduce a large touch bar between its start and select analogs, and yet would never consider removing them. Even Nintendo, who had in the N64 and GameCube era removed the select button, would bring them back with the Wii U and Nintendo Switch, as console parity and backwards compatibility became expected features. So, if you've ever wondered why controllers have this second start button, you now know that its inclusion can be traced back almost 40 years to the start of the home console revolution. It means that today we can still play classics like Donkey Kong as intended on modern control schemes, alongside cutting-edge experiences. The select button is a reminder of where video games have come from, and the potential of where they can go next. I've been James, and I'll see you all in the next upload.